So welcome all around the world, everyone listening to here in Hereford. We welcome you to the next part of She the Chapters, part 2. And last time we had quite a bit of fun, didn't we? There was a lot of laughter going on. And I shared about my story of salvation and also how I met Pastor G. Well, this time it's going to be a little bit more serious, just to give you the heads up. But our stories are so powerful, aren't they? They are stories of sharing. And I want to challenge you and encourage you even, right at the start of this message, to go away. And on social media, there's so much negativity, isn't there? And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we get some of our stories out there? Even maybe if it's a chapter, maybe you could put your whole testimony on social media. I think people would listen to it. I think people would be inspired by it. I think there's so much power in our stories. Jesus is in our stories. And I would encourage you to put some, I don't know, maybe even in Ignition Week, you had an answer to prayer. Maybe you've seen healing recently. Why don't you get on social media and tell that story? It's going to be so powerful. So I said last time, didn't I, about we have some of the good, bad, and the ugly in our stories. So this is going to be a bit more of the painful, ugly side of life. But there are a few funny parts as well. Because when I'm up here, there always seems to be a bit of fun. So, but in my experience, even in your painful chapters, it's through the painful, difficult times that people really lean in and listen, because they want to know, how did you get through those things? I thought you were a Christian and that bad things didn't happen to you. And it's such a great opportunity to point people back to Jesus and who he is, and that we can trust him with everything. And, our journey, we can share the miracle of some of the stories that we go through. And who doesn't love a miracle story? Everyone loves a miracle story. And people want to know, how did you overcome? How did you trust? And some of the difficult things that we go through is all part of us picking up our cross. We were never told it was going to be easy being a Christian, but we're told to take our cross, carry our cross. Our crosses all look different to each other's. We all have our own cross to bear, and we all have names of people on our crosses that we're going to meet, some of you yet to meet, and it's powerful to think the impact of our journey will make on others. And there's people in all of you, and I'm excited to see what you're going to do with your story, because at the end of it, that's all we have left. And I said also last time about, our stories is sometimes an outcome of our choices, and a lot of the time it is, because our choices are so powerful, and it is a choice to trust God as well. So our choices are so important. But there's sometimes things that happen to us not by choice, isn't there? The storms that come into our lives that we don't expect, but we still have a choice of how we deal with them. So I want to start off, because these two chapters from the Firestarter book, some of you might have read, is to do actually with Jordan and Luke. And so here's a little picture of them when they were younger. My little munchkins, aren't they just so cute? I know you all know them now as big, hunky men. But they started off like this. And some of you have got kids this age. So I just thought it would be good to put that up. And after I met Pastor G and we got married, little did I know that I was going to have 5 boys. That's a lot of boys. Telling you, it's a lot of boys. It's like a 5-a-side football team. It's like raising the 5 of the disciples. I don't know, but it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of fun as well. And I just love being mum to my boys. They are just so incredible. So this is the chapter, A Not So Good Friday. And yes, some of you will have read the chapter in the book. And I don't know about you, but I love Good Friday, because it's such a reminder of what Christ did for us on the cross, that he came, he gave his life for us, he forgave us. And, when Friday comes, we know that Sunday is coming, don't we? And it's always a great thing to remember that Sunday is coming, that day of victory, that day of resurrection, and that Jesus rose from the grave. And so I love a Good Friday. But this time we had our Good Friday event. This was years ago. I'm looking around the room, and some of you weren't even born yet, and we were still doing church back then. It was a long time ago in Leinster. And then afterwards we had family over, and there was this knock on the door. and I could see the green fluorescent jacket. I thought, gosh, it looks a bit like a policeman. I wonder what he wants. And he had come to arrest one of our sons. And, you know, it was a shock to us. We had no idea. It was a huge wake-up call to realize that one of our sons had secretly been involved in gangs, and he'd been involved in fighting and all the things that we kind of had taught him not to do. And so they had come to take him away, and they went up to his room to get some clothing for evidence. They wanted to take him away for questioning. And I've got to say, we were so shocked because, you know, the truth does hurt, doesn't it? But we needed to know what was happening so that we could walk through this chapter with him. So we were pretty shocked. We felt so sad. We felt sad, but we were sad for our boy, the choices that he was making. And to be honest, me and G, we felt pretty much failures at this time because, you know, it was so hard to understand. But at the same time, we knew that it wasn't the end. We knew it wasn't a full stop in Luke's story. It was a comma, but it was the start of a painful chapter in our lives as a family. And, you know, sometimes the storms come, and, you know, when a storm comes, you want it to be over pretty quick. But our storms seem to last for years. I don't know why. I think God was building something in us that was lasting. But so that was the Good Friday. But, you know, in our hearts, we knew that one day Sunday was going to be coming, and there was going to be victory in that story. And okay, it was longer than 3 days, but that Sunday, it came in the end. And then there was another Saturday, and there was another knock on the door early in the morning. I hate those early morning knocks on the door, or late night knock on the door. And again, this fluorescent jacket was like haunting me. I was like, that looks like a policeman. And straight away, I was like, what has Luke done now? And then I realized that when I saw the policeman's face, he said, oh, he hasn't done anything. He's been involved in a terrible car accident. And so again, my heart just sunk, because we didn't know at that point, you know, what injuries he had. We then went to the hospital. We then later heard that one of his friends had momentarily died on the side of the road because his lungs had collapsed. And they managed to bring him back to life, but sadly, he ended up having brain damage. And then another one of his friends was airlifted to hospital and had all kinds of pins put in his body. They didn't know if he was going to walk again, and the recovery was a long time. And Luke managed to smash the back of the car window, and he was found crawling along the road. And thankfully, he only suffered injuries of a broken collarbone. But I remember that morning, the driver of the car actually said, you know, because they would get in the car, they thought they were invincible, just like, you know, we do think, you know, our kids, they think they're invincible. And they didn't used to put their seatbelts on. And this one day, the lad driving said, I want you all to put your seatbelts on today. Otherwise, I think I would be here telling a different story. But I remember Luke suffering guilt because of the injuries that his friends had, and that he had got out, you know, pretty much okay. And so he recovered from that, but then carried, I think, some of the guilt of what his friends had gone through. And then I remember another day looking across the street and thinking, oh, there's Luke over there. And I was like, hang on a minute, I'm not sure if it is. I was like, I don't even recognize my own son. And it was a shock to me because it was like an erosion over time where the life was being sucked out of him. And I hardly recognized him. He had his cap down over his eyes. He was like a shadow of himself. And he looked pale and unrecognizable. And it was at that point we realized that he was also taking drugs. And it was like really sucking the life out of him. And I'm sharing these stories because this is what happened to us. This was real at one stage in our life, and we have to be real and honest. But of course, you know, that was causing difficulty in our home. There was trouble in the home. It was having an impact on our other boys. There was disharmony in the home. And, you know, we had to get to the stage where we were saying, you know, what G said, I think we're going to have to ask him to leave. And as a mum, I mean, that was like one of the worst things I could think of, was asking your own son to leave home. So we gave him like this ultimatum. It's like, you live by our rules if you live here. But, you know, I couldn't believe it had come to this. And, as a mother, to ask your son to leave was a very painful thing. And I was like, where's he going to go? Where is this going to end? And then that night, unusual for me, because I don't very often go off anywhere on my own, but I was actually had a trip booked to New York City, would you believe, with Karen Cook and a few others in here. And I had a trip booked to New York City because my husband, listen to this, he was like, I'm not interested in going to America. I was like, gee, I don't know how you can say, I'm sorry, America. But he said, unless there's purpose in it. And of course there is, because three of my sons live there now with their families. So I thought this was going to be the only chance I would ever have to go to America, or especially to New York. And G said, we will go, though, if it's purposeful. So obviously you know that our boys live there now. So I went upstairs to say goodbye to Luke, because I didn't even know if he was going to be at home when I got back. And to be honest, I really didn't feel like going at that point. And I was like, Luke, why is this happening? I feel like we're losing you. I told him how much I loved him, obviously, but he just looked ill, depressed, so pale. And, but he was still my little boy, and he was curled up in his bed. And, it was just horrible to see. It was heartbreaking. And at this point, I really didn't want to go. So I went off with the girls, and when we got there, I had a message from G, and he said, you'll never believe it, but I've had a letter from Luke, because obviously we'd given him this ultimatum, and he was actually quite angry about it. And then he said, so Gary said, but he's put a letter on my pillow, and I'm going to play the little video now, because this is his handwriting, and this is Luke reading his letter to us.
Dad, I thought a lot about moving out and thought it was a good idea. Since we argued the other day, I haven't been sleeping properly because I feel depressed and angry. I just want to cry, but can't. I'll just be sat there doing something, then all of a sudden just want to cry. I can't go on like this. It's because I don't have a relationship now with you or God. I was laying in bed, and all of a sudden it was like I had a blindfold taken off me, and I could see what was happening, what the devil was doing. But I did not feel that I could do anything, and I know that if I moved out, the bad things I do would only get worse and worse until I end up in prison, hospital, or even worse. I'm not going to let my pride and anger stand in the way of me saying I'm wrong, and I can't be responsible to live without God's rules. I'm so sorry I've let you, myself, God, and everyone down. I hope I can make a change in my life for good. I want to meet you halfway, if you will.
Oh, yeah, it's powerful even now, but that was the beginning of the turnaround in his journey. But we knew, I was so relieved that he'd sent that letter to G, and was so grateful, but I knew that there was a journey ahead. And it was funny, because of all the places in the world I could have gone, I was in New York, and one day he was going to be moving to New York City, our little boy from Leominster, and, he lived there for 6 years building church, and he was full-time with the church there. What a turnaround that was. It was incredible. It's like that was all part of Sunday's coming. And so, but the journey went on for a few years before that point. And at one point, we thought he was going to jail. It was nearly Christmas time, and it was like that day, it was like he was either going to come home with us or he was going to jail. I mean, two complete extremes. And so my emotions were like, I was pretty... I remember Karen coming. It's great to have great friends and sisters around you. And she came and she spoke. She did a character reference for Luke. And I remember feeling so nervous. I felt sick. I felt numb. I was like, where's this going to go? And I felt like I was holding onto hope by my fingertips. But there was this voice saying to me, do you remember when you dedicated your boy? You dedicated him as a little baby to me. And I want to say to you, you need to trust me with him right now, because he's still your little boy. And, those of you that dedicate your children, remember that it's not just something we go around and, it's not a tradition. It's something we do, and we mean it when we say it. And, years later, we can still say, God, I trust you with my child, and I surrender him to you. I surrender his life to you right now. And that day, he came home with us. And it was such a celebration. And I remember always speaking this verse over Luke, and it's Jeremiah 29:11, and a lot of you will recognize the verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And, if he'd have gone down to prison that day, that word that I used to speak, it's still the truth of God. It's not like, if he had gone to prison, that word is not true. That word, we've got to remember that his word is true and we can trust his word. And whatever the outcome is, whatever our circumstances is, it doesn't mean that God's word isn't true, because that was the truth. And I still declare those words over him today. And then Luke ended up going away for a decade. He started off in Australia. He went to Hillsong College. And, God, over those years, healed our relationship slowly. But we didn't see a lot of him. It was like for a decade, we hardly saw him. And then for the second year of lockdown in COVID, although that was terrible for all of us, Luke ended up having to come home. And he lived with us for a whole year, which after a whole decade of being away. And it was so special having him home. And it was a healing time for him personally. But also there was such healing in our relationship. It really was amazing. And I just want to say to you, never give up on your kids. Never give up on your kids, because God certainly doesn't. So you overcome one storm, and guess what? Another one hits. But what are we good at, ladies? We carry on, don't we? We keep smiling. We trust our God, and I know that some of you are trusting God with things now. You're raising your families. You might be working. You might be running a business. G was running a business. We were building church at the time, pursuing him and seeking his kingdom first. So this is the next chapter, and this one is about Jordan, and it's called An Unwelcome Surprise. I love surprises. I don't know about you, but this was not a good surprise. But when the storm hits and it's your kids, it's like sometimes we can trust God with everything else, but when it's our kids, it's like, don't touch my kids. And I've seen it with others, actually, when people refuse to surrender their kids. But it can become an Achilles heel. And, they end up sometimes worshiping their kids more than they worship God. And that's a dangerous place to get yourselves into, because I've seen people walk away because of putting their kids before God. And, I just want to say, that we need to surrender our kids to God always. So me and G at the time, we were in Africa with the Kopuks. They were in Kampala. We were on a mission trip. And first of all, I get a message through from Luke again. He's in Australia now. And it's a picture of his face. Now, Luke is pretty handsome. He's a good-looking lad. I know he's my boy, but he is handsome. He's got lovely blue eyes. But this picture was not a good picture of his face. He had been beaten black and blue. His face was swollen. It was out of shape. I didn't know if his jaw was broken. They'd even tried to gouge out his eyes as well. And he was in Australia in a nightclub dancing, and he got jumped on by about 13 lads. So that was the first surprise we had. And when you're away, a long way away from your kids, and things like that happen, it's really like disturbing and horrible, and you can't get to them. It's tough. And then we get a message through a few days later from Jordan. And he's like, Mum, I've had a hearing test, and I've also had an MRI scan, and they found a dermoid on my brain, and I have to have major brain surgery. I was like, a dermoid? What the heck is a dermoid? I've never heard of a dermoid. And I was like, I cannot believe that this is happening. George, he was never ill. He was the healthiest little kid. And I said, no, they must have got that wrong, George. They got your notes mixed up or something. It cannot be true. So I said, well, when we get back, we'll go and see the surgeon and see what he has to say. Go to the big city, make a day of it. We'll go out for lunch, have a bit of retail therapy. We love that, don't we? And the shock and the horror of when we went in, I was like, oh, this is true. He does have to have major brain surgery. And when she started saying to me the horrors that may happen, and that his limbs might not work properly afterwards, he might have brain damage, his personality might be different. And if you know George, he's such a character, you would not want him to be any different. He might lose his sense of smell and taste. And of course, there is a risk of death. And she looked me in the eye and she said that. And I was like, don't you speak that over my son. But I didn't say that to her because she was going to do the operation. But I did look at her in a pretty threatening way and said, I'll be praying for you. And so, yeah, bless her. She did a good job. Anyway, she said, the thing is, if he doesn't have major brain surgery, this thing could get bigger. He's also got this little hole he was born with in his nose, and there was a cavity that tracked right up to his brain. And she said he could get meningitis at any point and die. So with this, I just felt so sick at all the suggestions that might happen. And I just said, I feel so sick. And she said, do you want to come and lie on the bench over here? And so I got up to go to the bench and I collapsed on the floor. Then I'm crawling around on the floor. And George looks at me and he goes, Mum, what are you doing? He said, it's me that's having the operation. And I was like, poor George. And and that's the thing, though. I was like, if it was me having it, I'd probably be all right, but it's you having it. And so anyway, months of waiting. Again, it went on for a long time. And, you know, I got my weapons out. Praying, praising, trusting, praising, gratitude, on repeat, all of those things that we're called to do. And, you know, and it's hard because lifting weights is hard, right? Especially when you don't feel like it. And praying, praising, on repeat, trusting, gratitude. And what that's doing is it's building spiritual muscle. And God is doing something in those moments. So nothing is wasted, although it is a tough time to go through. And I remember not long before the operation, we were in Cardiff. There was some sort of worship night, and we were down in the mosh pit, absolutely going for it. And I felt like sitting in the corner and crying, to be honest. But I was like, no, this is my weapon. I'm going to worship. This is how we fight our battles, right? We get in the worship and we praise our God. And we say, I trust you. I'm going to trust you with this. And so we were dancing around like hooligans, and we must have looked a sight. I just want to mention Marshy, because the other week we were down here in worship together, and she was jumping up and down like a lunatic. And she was doing pirouettes, and she was singing, don't you tell me God can't do a miracle. She was shouting it out at the top of her voice, and I was singing with her. And honestly, it does something for you in here. And you are such an inspiration to me. If you are going through something and you are finding it hard to worship, get around that girl. She knows how to worship. Get around someone who knows to worship. So we waited for the appointment to come through, and it finally comes. And out of all the months, it's his birthday month. And I'm like, can't believe this, but it won't be the day of his birthday, surely. And then out of all the days in October, it was on his 22nd birthday. And I was like, this is some kind of a sick joke. So we had built a celebration culture in our family. We were like, we're going to go away to Italy. We're going to eat some great food. We're going to have a great time. We're going to party hard. We're going to have a great time. And George's going to have the best holiday. And when we got there, it was in Italy, and we went through these windy little roads up to the top. And then we got out the car. It was about midnight. It was so hot. And we should have gone to bed probably. But there was a beautiful full moon out. And there was this massive mountain right in front of us. And it was so beautiful, and that was our view for the week. And it was so stunning, but it was also very significant because of what we were going through in the spiritual. It's like this mountain that we were facing as a family. And, I just felt like God saying, you just need a mustard seed of faith to see this thing shift. And then God said to me at the beginning of the week, I felt God saying, I want you to go to the base of the mountain, and I want you to spit in the mud, and I want you to rub it on George's forehead. I'm like, God, really? Jesus, I know you did that, but I've never known anyone else to do that. And he was like, this is what I want you to do. So I was like, my family already think I'm a bit nuts. So I was like, let's just go with it. So we go down to the base of the mountain, and I spit in the mud and rub it on George's head and pray for a miracle, declare healing over him. And I don't know if that made any difference, but for me, it was like a step of obedience. We talked about obedience last time, and you know, we have to be obedient to what God is asking us to do, even if it makes us look silly. And that happens to me quite a lot. So, but the amazing thing was, when they did the operation around the dermoid, they had found a calcium barrier that was a barricade. It was like, we called it the helmet of salvation, actually, because it was like a shield of faith that had built around this dermoid and actually protected his brain. And so I don't know if that happened at the base of the mountain. I don't know, but anyway, months later, that day came of the big, long operation, 10-hour op. And they ended up, because they were going to go through his skull, and in the end, they opened up his face and pulled the dermoid down through his nose and actually burnt the dermoid as they were bringing it down. And it was pioneering surgery. They'd never done this before. So it was so incredible. And, you know, I wanted to be with George when he got put to sleep, but they were like, no, he's his own person. He's 22. He doesn't want, you know, and they wouldn't let me go and be with him. And as they put him to sleep, they were like, what are you going to do after this? And in a declaration of faith, if you know George, this is my boy, he was like, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to change the world. And that is what he declared out to the doctors and the nurses. And, you know, that's a statement of faith. That's saying, I trust you. I'm going for major brain surgery, but God, I trust you in this. And I can't tell you the power of prayer that day. The power of prayer. You know, when they say that a peace that surpasses all understanding, I couldn't understand that day how I felt so peaceful. Because once he was asleep, I was like, I knew that people around the world were praying, people I didn't know, people that didn't know me, that were praying for us. And it was such an incredible feeling. And I just think, how do people go through things without God versus with God? There's no comparison. And so we waited all day. It's a long day. We were praying and fasting. And then I remember getting a call saying he's coming out of surgery now. So we rushed back to the hospital, and I saw the surgeon come out, and he said it's been a success. And I said, can I hug you? And he was like, help yourself. So I squeezed the living daylights out of this poor little guy. And then he said, you can go and see your boy now. And I remember walking in, and I took him a birthday balloon, and it said, you are 1 in a million. I mean, who has brain surgery on their birthday? Here he is. Amazing. My little boy. And so he did make an amazing recovery. And it's quite funny because now we say, you know, it's only rich kids usually that have a nose job on their birthday. But like, so they they rebuilt his nose, and he has a completely different nose now. It's even better than the one he was born with. So we were like, George, you got a free nose job for your birthday. That's amazing. How incredible. There's always the bright side of looking at things. So this is so George and his declaration. I just want to take you through a few slides now of George's journey afterwards, because he went to Cambodia, and here's a few of the. So George is an amazing, relentless reacher, and he goes to Cambodia after he's recovered, and he meets this guy, and he's a relentless reacher. George is. He loves people. He loves chatting to people, and he builds a friendship. And later, Jaden gives his life to Jesus. Just incredible. And then he gets married to Volée, and she gives her life to Jesus, which is amazing. And you can see that, you know, these are the people on George's cross, you know, that he's carrying. And then their kids are growing up in church. There they are there. And there's Volée's brother, he also gets saved, and now he's helping in one of the churches over there also. And you can see how the picture's getting bigger and bigger. Then he goes to help plant in Battambang, the brother. And then Jaden and Valet become campus pastors of Siem Reap. And it's one of our fastest growing locations. And then we've just been there recently to celebrate their 10 years of being there, which is so incredible. So when George went, he went to be part of the team with Jan and Marlene. And even where they were staying at first, they were staying in an Airbnb or a bed and breakfast place. And they met another couple who are now, well, they got saved as well. And you might have heard of Tasha and Sandor. And they are actually leading church as well. They're campus pastors as well, which is incredible. But I will never take for granted George's journey of healing and recovery, because my brother's neighbour had the very same operation. I think with George it was a pioneering operation, and now they use it on other people. And my brother's neighbour is sat in a chair, he can't move and he can't speak. And, you know, I am just so grateful that God chose to heal and that our boy recovered. So the power of trust is huge, isn't it? The importance of trust. You know, and trust, what trust means is to put your confidence in God, to put your faith in God and his word. And his word, it's like so powerful, and it's the truth. And sometimes I think it's the hardest thing to trust. You know, we can say, oh yeah, of course I trust God. I love God, I trust him. But when it comes down to it, it's so easy sometimes to take things into our own hands. So let's have a look at some of his word that we can trust. In Proverbs, it says, trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try and figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do. Everywhere you go, he's the one who will keep you on track. And I just want to say, I want to declare right now over you ladies, he is true to his word. He is true to his word. And if you're looking for a miracle right now, he's done it before and he can do it again. And I want to say that to you. He's done it before and he can do it again. Some of you here need a miracle right now. He's done it before and he can do it again. And he's true to his word. And so what are the things that block our trust? Let's have a look at some trust blockers right now. I would say that disappointment is a huge one. Disappointment and discouragement, they're like little terrorists in our Christian life, aren't they? They're some of the worst things that you can face. And with disappointment and discouragement, it's such an erosion of faith that happens. And I remember I was praying for my boys in this situation. I was believing for them. I was trusting. But in the back of my mind, I was still battling disappointment after losing my mum. I was like, yeah, but what about mum? You know, I was praying for my boys. Yeah, but what if? Because what about mum? And, you know, I had that erosion of trust. And I don't think I realized it till later on. When I look back, I was like, I prayed for my boys. I thought I was trusting, but in the back of my mind, there was this erosion of trust. But sometimes we've got to trust in the bigger picture, because God knows the beginning from the end. We don't know that. He does, and he's saying, trust me, because he knows that. And I know now that because my mum died, that I was able to lead my dad to Christ. And I think if my dad had died first, I don't know if I would have had the opportunity to do that. But sometimes the answer comes differently to how we expect or what we want. But it doesn't mean that God isn't good and that we can still trust him. What about fear and worry? They're huge ones, aren't they? Fear and worry. You know, worry is such a complete waste of time. God says, don't do it. Don't worry. And yet we do it, don't we? It's almost like a automatic reaction. And sometimes we worry so much instead of praying for things. And the trouble is, it fills your mind, it consumes your mind, and there's little room for actually anything else. And it's a complete waste of time. I'll tell you that now. And fear, like you can imagine all kinds of fear, and yet most of the things never happen that you worry about or that you're fearful about. It's all up here, really. And so it's the biggest waste of time. We know as Christians we've got to replace fear with faith. And because a lot of those things that we're worried about are never going to happen anyway. Unbelief, that's another one. Saz spoke a beautiful message about this the other week, about how we've got to change our mortal mindset for a miracle mindset. And, distrust can come in if we have unbelief. And, where does unbelief come from? It comes from the lies of the enemy. He's the father of all lies. He's the master of suggestions. And just like that doctor, I know they have to tell you all the things that could go wrong. But for me, it felt like the enemy was suggesting all these things that might happen. And then I had to battle through them. I had them in my head of all the things that might go wrong. But just use them to pray instead. But, even in the garden, there was Eve. And what does he come? He says, can you really trust God? Did he really say that? He is the master of suggestion. So we have to choose to believe and put our trust in him. The last one is trusting ourselves, trusting in our own strength. Because that is huge. I think we default to that quite a lot as women. I think we think, it's harder to put your trust in something outside of yourself than to trust in yourself. Or we can look to others and we trust them more than, trusting God. And so many of us, we look to therapy and self-help. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a great thing. But he is the helper. Don't let that replace the helper. And I think a huge part, actually, of trusting God is trusting in his timing. Because when things don't happen on our time, when we want them to, and things go on for years, and when you're in a storm, you want it to end now, but sometimes God is doing something bigger, and we want things right now, but we got to trust in his timing. Because what he's doing is he's building resilience, he's building faith, he's building character, he's building patience in you. And, we take these things into our own hands. And a great example of this is actually Sarah and Abraham. They were promised that they would have kids, loads of kids, as many as the stars. And they were getting older. And what does Sarah do? She doesn't trust in God's timing, but she takes things into her own hands. And she sends her husband off with the maidservant. That is never going to be a good idea. What was she thinking? Sarah, that is never going to end well. That is a recipe for disaster. What were you thinking? But she took things into her own hands and she started manipulating the situation. And then the messengers come back, or the three messengers come and they say again to Abraham, no, you will have a child and it'll be in old age. And she's in the tent and she starts laughing because she's like, I can't believe this. This is hysterical. Look how old we are. I mean, she was looking at Abraham and she was like, there ain't nothing happening down there. And I honestly think, if I was told I was going to have a baby at 90, I think I would have cried. I don't think I would have laughed. But they were just so old that she just couldn't. And then he pulls her up on it. He goes, Sarah, why did you laugh? He actually says, Sarah, why did you? And she actually said, she denies it to God. And he said, why did you laugh? Twice. And he says, is there anything too hard for me? And that's why I want to declare of you, ladies, tonight. Is there anything too hard for God? There isn't. There's nothing too hard for him. So in Psalm 180, it says, better to trust in the Lord than put your confidence in man. It's so true. Choose to trust him, though, in every season. It's easy to trust, isn't it? Yeah, I trust God when everything's going hunky-dory. It's great. I really trust him. Then as soon as the storm hits, we're like, God, help me. And we lose a bit of that trust. It's like when I was crawling across the floor in the doctor's office. That wasn't a picture of trust, really, was it? It really wasn't a picture of trust. So in Isaiah it says, you will keep in perfect peace those minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Trust in the Lord forever. Our peace is connected to our trust. We need trust in our lives, don't we, right now? At the end of the day, there is no one else. Salvation is only in God. There is nobody else. We try and trust ourselves. That's never going to work. So we trust in God or we don't. But there's no one else. But it's easier to be, we talked about obedience last time, and I think it's much more easier to be obedient if we trust. And so God is asking us to trust, and he's asking us to be obedient. It says, doesn't it? Some may trust in horses, some may trust in chariots, but we ladies, we will trust in the name of our God, the God of the angel armies. And just like David, he ran down to the battle line. We need to get our fighting talk on. We need to get down to the battle line, and we need to say, I will trust you, God. I will trust in the name of the God of the angel armies. In Romans 8, it says, so why do you think, with God on our side like this, how can we lose? If God didn't hesitate to put everything on the line for us, embracing our condition and exposing himself to the worst thing by sending his own son, is there anything else he wouldn't gladly and freely do for you? What a beautiful scripture. And I just grab hold of that and I think, God sent his only son. He doesn't have several sons. He has one son, and he sent his son to rescue my sons. And that's what I can trust. I can trust that because he sent his only son. In Colossians, it says, Christ brought you over to God's side and put your lives together whole and holy in his presence. You don't walk away from a gift like that. You stay grounded and steady in that bond of trust. Again, it's that bond of trust, and we have that bond of trust because of what he did on the cross for us. So I just want to ask the questions. What areas do you find it hard to trust God in? Maybe it is with your kids. There's a lot of you that haven't got kids yet. Maybe it's God's timing for that. Maybe it's relationships. Maybe it's finances. Maybe it's for your future. Or maybe it is to do with his timing and it's not on your timing. And then we've got to ask why as well. Why do we find it hard to trust? Let's get to the root of it. Let's get to the bottom of it. And you know what? If you can't trust God, you're going to find it really hard to trust people as well. It's going to be hard for you to trust people. It's going to be hard for you to trust your leaders. And we've looked a lot in Burn the Plough, haven't we, about patterns. And I think some of us have got into a pattern of distrust. We found ourselves in a pattern of distrust. And God says, don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We've got to start imitating God's pattern and trusting him. I feel like some of us need to actually repent tonight for distrust, for not trusting him. And we've got to be sorry, We've got to come and be sorry and say, I'm really sorry that I don't trust you. And we've got to change that mindset. Years ago, there was something me and G always used to say to each other. Whenever we'd had a really bad day or we'd been through, obviously I've shared some of the stories tonight. We obviously faced bankruptcy at one point. We've been through so many different ups and downs and people leaving the church and but at the end of the day, we always used to say, do you know what? God is still on his throne. And he's still on his throne. Whatever we've been through today, he's still on his throne. He's still king. And we used to raise a glass or a cup of tea to the King of Kings because God is sovereign and he's still on his throne. And I just want to declare he can do a miracle. He could do a miracle tonight. Jesus is king in our suffering and king in our success. Jesus is king when you doubt, and he is king when you are faithful. Jesus will always be king. He will always be king, which means he can always be trusted. And there is salvation in nobody else. So whatever you're going through tonight and whatever you need a miracle in, just think of it, it's Friday and Sunday's coming. Be hopeful that Sunday is coming. It might be longer than 3 days and you might be having a bad Friday or a good Friday, but Sunday is coming. And let's, we talked, didn't we, last time about taking a leaf out of each other's book. Let's take a leaf out of Jordan's book. And, if you were having brain surgery tomorrow or going through something, whatever you're going through that's tough at the moment, just declare that you can change the world with God on your side and with trusting him. Let's declare some of these things. We can change the world. And I want us to come now, and we're going to worship together. But we are going to come and run down to the battle line. And we're not going to get people to pray for you tonight. We are going to come and we're going to declare a trust to God. We're going to declare it. We're going to say sorry if we've been mistrusting. We're going to say, God, I trust you with everything. We're going to come down to the battle line. So let's get down here to the battle line and worship together. Amen.